Have you ever heard of a woman accusing her deceased husband of trying to kill her? It may sound strange, but this is a true story, and one worth following closely. Hello, and welcome. In this video, I invite you to follow a new investigation that takes us this time to the United States of America, specifically to the city of San Angelo. In this city lived a family made up of a father named Olgi Nobles, a mother named Leda Nobles, and their only son. Leda and Olgi met while working at an air conditioning maintenance company, which is common in Texas, a state known for its hot weather. Their relationship developed, and they decided to leave their jobs and get married. Together, they started their own business called Noble's Company, which eventually became well known in the region. Years went by, and the couple had a child. But as he grew up, they discovered he had a physical disability that prevented him from walking. This made their family life complicated and full of tension, especially between the couple. Olgi became an alcoholic and a cheater, while Leda took on the burden of running the business and raising their disabled son. She barely found any time for herself. Despite all the problems, Leda stayed patient with her situation. She refused to divorce him because she believed their shared business and assets made separation too complicated. Plus, she sometimes still needed his help with their child, even if he was stealing money from the company. Years passed, and Olgi reached the age of 70. He eventually became ill and passed away. Just 2 months after his death, Leda began suffering from serious health problems. She went to the local hospital complaining of severe abdominal pain, chronic fatigue, and difficulty standing. After some tests, the doctor told her it was likely psychological. Grief and loneliness following her husband's death. But just a few days after returning home, her symptoms came back even worse. She could no longer control her limbs, developed a kind of progressive paralysis, and suffered from constant dizziness. She was readmitted to the hospital. After more in-depth tests, doctors made a shocking discovery. Leda was being poisoned with arsenic. The amount of arsenic in her body was 3 times the lethal dose. Yet she was still alive, which astonished the doctors. How did she survive? And who was trying to kill her? When investigators came and asked if she had any enemies or suspects in mind, she answered simply, "My husband wanted to kill me. He always said, 'When I die, I'll take you with me.'" The investigators were confused. Her husband had been dead for 2 months. How could he be poisoning her after his death? But Leda insisted on her claim, saying she was certain Olgi had planned everything before he died. She seemed convinced that his death hadn't stopped him from carrying out his threat. The police opened an investigation and interviewed neighbors and acquaintances. Everyone confirmed that the couple had problems, but not to the extent of attempted murder. At this point, the investigators started to consider a new angle. If the husband really had planned to poison his wife, how did he do it? Could he have laced food she would eat later? Or perhaps her medication? Did he ask someone else to carry out the act after his death? And here the question remains. Was Olgi so obsessed that he wanted to take his wife to the grave with him? Or was there another unknown person who used the circumstances to poison her in her husband's name? The investigation is still ongoing. But what we know for sure is that Leda narrowly escaped certain death, and now the police are seriously considering the possibility that the killer is already dead. Leda told the police, "Who could know for sure? But I assure you, I didn't eat or drink anything unusual before those symptoms started." The police decided not to jump to the conclusion that this was a murder attempt, until they confirmed that the arsenic wasn't present in the house or surrounding environment by accident, especially since arsenic is commonly used in pest control and can exist in sewage systems or garden soil due to pesticides. So, before building a case on the theory of deliberate poisoning, they chose to search Leda's home, garden, and the surrounding area. They collected samples of the food at her house, soil from the garden, and even wastewater, and sent them to labs for analysis. But the biggest surprise was that the labs found no trace of arsenic in any of the samples. This deeply puzzled the police. The woman had clearly been poisoned. Her symptoms were obvious and worsened after returning from the hospital. And arsenic typically stays in the blood for 24 to 48 hours before moving into the urinary system, with traces remaining in hair and nails. Since it showed up in her blood, it meant she was exposed to it less than 2 days before reaching the hospital. But if there was no trace in the home, where did it come from? Could it be the company? She insisted she hadn't left the house since the symptoms began. The police went back and questioned Leda again. After you came back from the hospital, what were you eating or drinking? She answered, I wasn't really eating. The only thing I was drinking was 7-Up, to ease the burning in my stomach. I'd open it myself, drink a little, and then take the antacid you prescribed. Based on that, police found the 7-Up bottle in the trash, along with the medication she had been taking. Both were sent to the forensic lab. After analyzing the medicine, the result came back. It contained arsenic. At this point, it became clear to the police. This wasn't an accident. It was a crime. They informed Leda that her husband couldn't have poisoned her because the poisoning occurred after she came back from the hospital. And, more shockingly, the man she had accused may have died in the same way. After some convincing, Leda agreed to sign off on the exhumation of her husband's body for analysis. Forensics extracted hair samples, and the lab results showed Olgi had also died from a high dose of arsenic. Now, Olgi's death was officially ruled a homicide, not a natural death from old age. The investigation shifted to figuring out who could have poisoned them both. It had to be someone very close to the family. The police expanded their investigation and started to rule out Leda, since she was still clinging to her original theory, that her husband poisoned her, even though all the evidence said otherwise. The investigation revealed that only 2 people had been visiting the house: Leda's son, a young man with a physical disability. Despite this, the police still suspected him and conducted a blood test. However, no trace of arsenic was found in his system. He remained a partial suspect, but nothing more. Businessman Skogen, who had purchased the company from Leda and Olgi before the latter's death. He had been visiting Leda from time to time, especially after her husband's passing, to check on her well-being. The police presented these 2 names to Leda and told her one of them was likely responsible. But she firmly rejected the idea, saying her relationship with her son was excellent, and he knew that no one else would take care of him but her. So he could never even consider hurting or killing her. As for Skogen, she said he was the one who took her to the hospital when her condition worsened. If he had poisoned her, why would he save her himself? It would have been easier for him to let her die. But the police weren't convinced and began digging into Skogen's background. And what they found was shocking. Despite Leda's strong defense of both her son and Thames, the police weren't swayed by her words. They decided to dig deeper into Skogen's past. That's when things took an unexpected turn. The investigation revealed that Thames had previously lived in another Texas city called Llano, about 200 miles away from San Angelo. In that city, he was known for befriending wealthy, elderly people. Among his closest acquaintances in Liano were two elderly sisters, Cordelia Norton and Catherine Norton. They came from an old, wealthy family that made its fortune in mining and had inherited about $5 million. Before meeting Thames, the sisters had been terribly lonely. They had never married, had no children, and no close family. When Thames entered their lives, he turned their world upside down. That's why he became the only person they fully trusted. He took them to doctor's appointments, cooked for them, and sometimes accompanied them to events. Feeling safe and happy with the life Thames gave them, the sisters would occasionally hint that they would one day reward him for everything he had done. Others who knew Thames told police that he often said he would inherit the sisters' estate, claiming they had promised to include him in their will. But in the end, the sisters died, one after the other, with just a one-day gap between their deaths. Catherine died on February 19, 1998, at the age of 75. Authorities ruled that both deaths were caused by heart attacks. It was suggested that the second sister may have died from the grief of losing the first. Also, given their advanced age, the official medical report concluded that both deaths were natural due to heart failure. But as the police dug deeper, they discovered that the will the sisters had recorded with their lawyer didn't include Thames at all. Thames was present when the lawyer came to read the will, and when he realized he had been excluded, he stormed out of the room, furious. That's when the investigators' real suspicions began. Yes, the coroner had confirmed heart attacks as the cause of death. But the police couldn't ignore that poisons like arsenic can also induce heart failure, which meant the sisters might have been poisoned, just like Olga. And don't forget, the time between the sisters' deaths was just one day. Another thing that raised suspicion was that Thames had still been living with the sisters in Llano when they died. If Thames was indeed the killer, this would be his third perfect crime. Honestly, if you think about it, it's very hard to believe it was all just a coincidence. The same man was present during the deaths of both sisters, Olga, and even during a failed murder attempt on another person. That's too much. The police decided to exhume the sisters' bodies to test for traces of poison. But the shocking surprise was this. When they began the legal procedures to exhume the bodies, they discovered that the sisters had both been cremated, per their own signed request made before death. Their will, signed and handwritten by both sisters, clearly stated their wish to be cremated. Now, the police had no bodies to examine, only ashes. And without physical evidence, it was nearly impossible to prove that Thames had poisoned them, whether by the same method or another. The only common thread was that Thames was present at every scene. Still, to be fair, the police considered another possibility. Perhaps this man was just incredibly unlucky, and terrible things simply happened around him without his involvement. Maybe he just happened to be present at tragic events, but the more realistic theory forming in the minds of investigators was that Thames was a serial killer who knew exactly what he was doing. In just 12 months, 3 people very close to Thames had died, and a 4th had nearly died as well. And if you think about it, you'd probably say, it's 100% clear. Thames Skogen is the killer. But the most important question now was, how can the police prove that the sisters were poisoned if their bodies had turned to ashes? Scientifically, cremation reaches temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius for up to 3 hours, turning the body to complete ash. Practically, there was nothing left to examine. Still, the police did not give up. They contacted every forensic lab in Texas, looking for anyone who could extract evidence from ashes. All the responses were negative, except for one doctor. He was a toxicology researcher working at a lab under the Texas Department of Public Safety. His goal was to develop a reliable method to detect arsenic or any poison in cremated human remains. His main idea was that arsenic is a metal, and some metals can survive the intense heat of cremation, leaving traces, especially in bone fragments or teeth, even after burning. Here's what the doctor did. He took a sample of ash from each sister. For each sample, he poured strong hydrochloric acid to dissolve the organic matter. Then he placed the samples in 2 test tubes, each containing zinc and nitric acid, and heated them over a flame. If arsenic was present, a chemical reaction would occur, producing a gas that creates black deposits on the inner walls of the glass tube. He would then analyze those deposits to detect a gas called arsine, a compound of arsenic. If no black residue appeared, that would mean no arsenic was found. And the result? The test was successful, but only for Catherine's sample. Black deposits appeared, and when analyzed, they confirmed the presence of arsenic in her ashes. As for Cordelia's sample, no black residue appeared, meaning no arsenic was detected. But wait, Cordelia died just 1 day after her sister. That couldn't be just a coincidence. Someone must have done something to her too. Even the forensic expert couldn't explain the mystery. How could poison show up in one sister but not the other, when they died only 24 hours apart? The investigators were baffled. If Catherine had been poisoned with arsenic, why was there no trace in Cordelia's body, even though they lived together and died in the same house within a day of each other? They started to consider multiple possibilities. Maybe Tim didn't kill Cordelia at all. Or perhaps he did poison her, but used a different substance that didn't leave detectable traces after cremation. There was also another theory. What if the cause of Cordelia's death wasn't poison, but rather shock or emotional trauma? The investigators considered that the emotional devastation from losing her sister, her only companion in life, may have been too overwhelming. Still, the timing felt too suspicious. How likely is it for 2 elderly sisters to die of heart attacks in the same house, within 24 hours of each other, and both in the presence of the same man who just happened to be excluded from their will? The evidence was not enough to charge Tim, but the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. 3 people now, Olga, Catherine, and possibly Cordelia, all died under questionable circumstances with Tim nearby. And there was a 4th victim, Lita, who had survived an attempted poisoning. The police decided to take a closer look at Tim's financial history. They obtained a warrant to check his accounts and uncovered some shocking details. Just 2 days after Catherine's death, Tim made a large cash deposit, nearly $25,000. No clear source was documented. There were no traces of inheritance, no business deals. It was suspicious, but again, not definitive. When questioned, Tim claimed it was a private gift from an old friend, a man who, conveniently, had passed away shortly after. Still, the police were now convinced. Tim Skogen was no ordinary man caught in tragic coincidences. He was calculated, strategic, and possibly dangerous. They brought Lita in for another round of questioning. She remained firm. "My son didn't poison me, and Tim saved my life. I will not let you destroy his name." But behind her eyes, the detectives could see something: fear. not fear of the police, fear of the truth. For that reason, although Tim was arrested as part of the investigation, there were no official charges against him at the time. However, once news of his arrest spread in the newspapers, especially since the two sisters were well known in town, the media spotlight on the case intensified. One day, the police received a call from a man who owned a large supermarket. This man told them that when he saw Tim Skogen's picture in the city newspaper, he immediately remembered him. He stated that Tim had once visited his store and purchased a large quantity of rat poison. Not only that, but he also provided the brand name of the arsenic that was purchased. This statement became the first direct piece of evidence suggesting that Tim might actually have poisoned one of the sisters. But the more important question was the cremation of the bodies, which was presented as the sisters' own wish during their lifetime, just a coincidence? Because, as previously mentioned, once the bodies are cremated, it becomes nearly impossible for the police to determine the true cause of death. The police continued their investigation and requested the documents related to the cremation orders, which were supposedly signed by Catherine and Cordelia before their deaths. After a thorough examination of those papers, the police discovered that all the signatures were forged. They concluded that Tim was the one who had prepared those documents and forged the signatures. As they delved deeper into Tim's past, they found out that his original profession was embalming bodies, and that this was a family trade passed down from generation to generation. Long before he turned into a businessman, this meant that Tim knew very well that cremating the bodies would prevent any crime from being uncovered, and he was confident no one would be able to discover what he had done. The most likely scenario was that Tim, after the deaths of the sisters and believing he had committed the perfect crime, went to the city of San Angelo, where he met Lida and Olga, and became closer friends with Olga than with Lida. He would go out with her, party, and even drink together. One day, he convinced Olga that he and his wife were getting older, and that it would be better for them to sell their business and start living a life of ease. He reassured her that he wouldn't leave them without work, but that they would continue helping him with a few simple tasks, for a generous salary. Since Tim Skogen didn't have the full amount of money at the time, he agreed with Olga to pay part of the amount up front, and the rest in monthly installments. He had to pay her $1,750 every month until the total was settled. From this, it can be concluded that the main motive behind the attempted murder of Lida and the murder of Olga was Tim's desire to escape his monthly payment obligations. In other words, to get rid of his debt. But what worked against Tim, and what he hadn't anticipated when using poison, was that Olga did indeed die. But Lida, because she had consumed the poison in small doses over spaced intervals, developed a resistance to it. Just imagine, if she had died, the police would never have been able to uncover the crimes Tim had committed in the past. After being confronted with all the evidence, and after repeatedly denying the accusations, he finally confessed to everything he had done. In the end, Tim Skogen was charged with multiple offenses, including premeditated murder, attempted murder, fraud, theft, forgery, and embezzlement. As you can see, he spent his entire life making money through criminal means. At the end of his trial, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences.